You can leave it to me, I'll take her myself.
Take her to my bedroom. That was the low order from a man I had never seen before. And yet, every one of them obeyed as if my life already belonged to him. Hours earlier, I had found out that Dante, the perfect boyfriend, had secretly bought my family's debt, turned my heartsick father into a hostage, and called all of that love. Now my parents were gone. The house was locked, and the only person who heard my desperation in the hotel hallway was Nikolai Dravin, the Bratva Pakan. He didn't promise salvation. He didn't ask permission. He just pulled me in far too close. And I realized, too late, that some men don't put a woman in a safe place. They put her inside their own war. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1. The night everything came down. I counted the bills inside my coat pocket with the tips of my fingers, never taking my hand out, because on the New York subway nobody needs to know you're carrying a whole week's pay in cash. $180. 2 of my father's medications, maybe 3, if the pharmacy in Queens still honored last time's discount. I pressed the discreet little stack against the lining of my coat, the way you press a charm, and for a second the smell of stale coffee and the iron of the train car dragged me back to the heavy reality of the hour. The Upper East Side student had missed the same scale 3 lessons in a row, and her mother, gold bracelet and a yawn, had asked me if I couldn't soften the correction. I smiled. I softened. That's what a good piano teacher does when the check has to clear on Friday. It's also what you learn when you grow up counting coins at the pharmacy counter, with your mother staring at the rug while the pharmacist types in the total. The car jolted. I leaned my head against the glass and closed my eyes for one luxurious second. It was almost 7 at night, and I still had to cross half the island to reach Dante's penthouse. He'd sent the driver to pick me up, of course. I had sent the driver away, of course, too. Don't ride up to a penthouse man's place in his car. Don't depend on the person paying for the road. That was a piece of advice my mother gave me without ever having needed it herself. I, Isabella Voss, was 24 years old, and I took that advice as seriously as someone who wears a crucifix around their neck. When I got off at 59th and Lexington, I started doing the math on what was left for the month. My mother's rent, my father's health plan, the overdue installment for the new cardiologist. Dante had offered 3 months ago to handle that while we figure out a long-term solution. I had refused 3 times and given in the 4th, when my dad had his first fainting spell in the bathroom, and I found him on the white tile floor, pajamas crooked, hand on his chest. A gift of love, he said. I swallowed it down with red wine and the sense that I had given up a border I shouldn't have. The penthouse was in a building where the doorman called me Mrs. Falcon, even though I corrected him every single time. The elevator went up too fast. I was still fixing my hair when the doors opened onto the black marble floor. The view of Park, the smell of the dinner he'd had delivered from the Italian place down the street. Golden garlic, butter, rosemary, the kind of aroma that gets into the sleeve of your coat and stays. Dante had his back to me, on the phone, sleeves rolled up, the low light turning him into the magazine man he was. 32 years old, gray suit, a smile that apologized for nothing. When he saw me, he ended the call mid-sentence and came to the door as if I were the last appointment, and the only one that mattered. Late, he said, holding my face with both hands. 5 minutes. Traffic? You know I sent the driver. I know. He laughed, kissed my forehead, smelled like his usual expensive cologne, burnt wood and citrus, and for a second, inside the liturgy of that gesture, I believed again that the whole year had been real. Believing is a muscle, and mine, that night, was still working on inertia. We had dinner near the window. He talked about a deal in Miami, a wine he'd bought at auction, my mother, asking with carefully calibrated delicacy if her February tests had come back. I answered yes. Thank you. He thanked me for the thank you, and that was how we talked now, on our fingertips, over porcelain. The low candles flickered when the air conditioning kicked in, and I kept watching the trail of smoke rise straight up, then twist, then vanish. His phone buzzed 3 times in a row. 4, 5. Work? I asked. Always. He got up to get a new bottle from the wine cellar. That was when the phone buzzed again, and the screen lit up on the table, turned toward me without asking permission. The first message was short. I'm waiting. Come up. No name, just the initial V. The second was from an L, with a photo I couldn't help but see. Bare shoulder, rumpled sheet, the tattoo I knew he hated on me and loved on other women. The third, from an R, said simply, "Tomorrow. Same time." I didn't move. I kept the glass in my hand. I breathed through my nose. Long, controlled. The way my mother taught me for the moment when you need to not cry in front of someone who doesn't deserve it. And then the screen changed to a fourth notification. Attachment. Photo. Document opened. I tilted my chin 1 millimeter and read what was there. Contract. My father's name in printed letters. The value of the debt that had nearly ruined us 4 years before. And the stamp, at the bottom, of a company I recognized. Vasari Holdings. I'd first seen it on a card in Dante's wallet, 3 months after we started dating, when he laughed and explained it was one of his little things. The debt that almost killed my father had been bought by him, held by him, suffocated and breathed by him, on a rhythm only he set, for an entire year in which I had slept next to him and called that luck. I didn't scream. I didn't tremble. I didn't drop the glass. I felt a thin ringing in my left ear, the kind you hear right before you faint, and I shoved that down with all the rest. I drank the wine to the bottom, my mouth dry, feeling every sip go down like ground glass. By the time Dante came back with the new bottle, I'd already put the phone back where he had left it, screen dark, as if nothing had appeared. "You're pale," he said, smiling. "Tired?" "Tired." He refilled my glass. He toasted me. He talked about a weekend in Aspen I hadn't asked for. He talked about a new jeweler on Madison. Talked about the snow. Talked as if his words still had any authority over my calendar. I waited for his second sip. I waited for his fork to touch the plate. And then I took off the ring. It wasn't an engagement ring. It was a loose silver ring he had given me on our 6-month anniversary, with one of his initials on the inside, and I set it on the table between us, in no hurry. The metal hit the wood with a small, civilized sound that was exactly the sound I wanted him to hear. "I'm leaving," I said, "and I never want to see you again." He looked at the ring. He looked at me, and he smiled. Not the smile from the doorway, not the smile of the kiss on the forehead. A different one, thinner, slower. The smile of a man who had been waiting for that exact moment for far too long. "Are you sure, Isabella?" "I am. Think again." "I already have." He leaned back in his chair, crossed his legs, brought the glass to his mouth without looking away from me, and I saw, for the first time in the whole year, the naked calculation behind his pupil. Cold, patient, ancient. "All right," he said. "As you wish." I picked up my coat from the back of the sofa with the hand that wasn't trembling, and crossed the black marble floor to the elevator without looking back. I press the button. I wait. Every second is a promise that he's going to come after me. He doesn't. The doors close. I go down. In the lobby, the doorman called me Mrs. Falcon again. I didn't correct him. I didn't have the strength left in my lips to remind him, for the 100th time, that my name was Isabella Voss, and that Voss was the only last name I had any right to carry that night. I got a cab to Queens, and for the 30 minutes of the crossing, I kept my jaw locked and the phone in my hand, waiting for my mother to answer, for my father to answer, for anyone in that house to answer. Voicemail, voicemail, voicemail. I told myself it was medication time. I told myself my father goes to bed early. I told myself a lot of things on that ride, and when the cab turned onto my street and stopped in front of the brick house where I grew up, I had already undone every story and was left with the only truth that fit there. The lights were off. The front door had a new padlock, silver, gleaming too bright for a street like that, and 2 men in dark suits were smoking, leaning against a black sedan on the curb across the way. I didn't get out. "Keep going," I told the driver, in a voice that wasn't mine. "Ma'am, keep going. Head to Manhattan. I'll tell you where to stop." He kept going. I looked out the back window. One of the men flicked his cigarette into the gutter, lifted his chin at me, and took his phone out of his pocket. Mine buzzed a minute later. A single message. No photo, no signature, no contact name. I knew who it was from, the same way you know where the smell of burning is coming from in a sealed apartment. "Come back to me, or you'll never see your parents again." I read it 3 times. I deleted it. I reopened the app, found the message again, still intact, because messages like that don't disappear. You just pretend they did. I put the phone back in the inside pocket of my coat, along with what was left of the week's pay, and I felt, in the center of my chest, a new and organized weight, as if someone had filed my fear onto shelves inside me. I calculated quickly. Not the police. Dante had the district attorney over for Christmas, and the precinct captain for his birthday. Not Mira's place. She lives with 3 roommates, and I don't drag danger to anyone's doorstep. Not a cheap hotel. A cheap hotel has a doorman who'll take a tip to let someone in. I thought of the only place in Manhattan where every hallway camera is recorded by a private security firm that doesn't talk to NYPD, where room service requires biometrics, where Dante, trying to cross the lobby, would run into 3 guards making a month's salary not to recognize his name. I changed my mind, I said. The new hotel on 57th. The one with the restaurant on the top floor. Are you sure, ma'am? The driver asked, looking in the rear view at my coat, soaked with a sweat I hadn't even noticed. I am. I walked into the hotel lobby with my shoulders back and my chin up, because the tone of your voice only works if your body matches. The floor was a pale marble, polished to reflect the chandelier, and the air had an expensive smell of lily and cedar that seemed engineered by someone to make money feel at home. I paid for the night with almost everything I had. The receptionist, Immaculate Bun, asked me if I wanted a standard floor or a private one. I looked at the price of the private floor and calculated my father's medicine for 1 more week if I paid for it. I calculated the price of not paying. Private, I said. She ran the card without comment, handed me the key card with both hands, and wished me a good night in the low voice of someone who had seen women walk in there faking it together plenty of times. I rode up alone in the silent elevator, leaned my temple against the cold mirror, and felt, for the first time since the penthouse, my legs start to shake under the fabric. When the doors opened onto the gray carpeted hallway with its low lighting, the silence of the entire floor wrapped around me like an extra layer of air. I took the phone out of my pocket and dialed the only number I knew by heart without having to think. Mira, I said, my voice already out of control. Mira, I need you. Mira, he bought the debt. He bought everything. I leaned against the wall and let my body slide to the floor. The carpet scratched the back of my thighs through my tights, and I counted, without noticing, the small recessed ceiling lights. 1, 2, 3, 4, until her voice on the other end pulled me back. I didn't see, at the end of the hallway, near the door of the private elevator, the man in the black suit leaning against the dark wood frame, hands in his pockets, standing so still he seemed part of the wall. Chapter 2. Take her to my bedroom. Mira, listen, I said, low, on the phone, my temple against the cold wall of the hallway. Listen, I saw the messages. I saw a contract with my father's name on it and the stamp of a company of his. The whole debt, Mira, every cent for a year. And he smiled at me over breakfast. Her voice on the other end was a thread of forced calm, the kind you force when you don't want the other person to fall apart. Where are you right now? Hotel, Manhattan, private floor. I had to pay for the private one because it's the only one he can't get into. Bela, my parents are gone, Mira. The house is locked. There are 2 men outside. He sent me a message. He said to come back or I'll never see them again. Mira, I'm not going back. I can't go back. But if I don't go back, breathe. I can't breathe. Breathe, Bella. I breathed. It was an ugly sound, scraped, like air through a clogged crack, but it was breath. I'm getting a car right now, she said. Give me the name of the hotel. Don't come. Don't drag your home into this. I just need to talk until sleep comes. I just need a voice that isn't lying to me. I heard the silence on the other end, and inside the silence on my side, I heard something else. The very low click of a lighter being opened and closed. Not lit, just opened and closed. With a patient cadence, too close. The hallway smelled like new carpet, the expensive perfume of a guest who had already walked through, and furniture polish, nothing that would justify the presence of a lighter. I lifted my eyes. At the end of the hallway, leaning against the dark frame of the private elevator door, there was a man, black suit, no tie, first button open, left hand in his pocket, right hand playing with the lighter. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the carpet, or at his shoe, or at nothing, but I knew he had heard. He had heard everything, from the first name to the last. Mira, I'll call you back in a bit, I whispered. Bella, I'll call you back. I hung up. I planted both hands on the carpeted wall and tried to stand up gracefully, because it was the only thing I had left of myself. My legs didn't obey. I slid back down. The edges of my vision darkened, the way they do when you've gone 3 hours without food, and another 3 without air. I heard the man say something low, not to me, to the air. 2 short syllables in a language that wasn't mine, said with the naturalness of someone ordering his own coffee. Then louder, in accented but unmistakable English, the kind of order no one even thinks about disobeying. Take her to my bedroom. I wanted to say no. I wanted to say I had paid for the private floor exactly so I wouldn't be taken to anyone's room. But what came out of my mouth was nothing, and the last image before the full dark was of another man appearing from the far end of the hallway, tall, broad-shouldered, with the expression of someone who didn't care about my face, only about the job. I didn't faint like in the movies. I fainted like in hospitals, in layers, with consciousness coming and going like a bad curtain. I woke up lying on my side on a low sofa, in a room far too big to be an ordinary hotel room. High ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, heavy curtains half drawn, just one lamp on, golden, far from my face, as if someone had calculated that I would need low light to keep from panicking the moment I opened my eyes. The air smelled of polished wood and some discreet men's cologne, a dry bitterness that lingered at the back of the throat without attacking it. I sat up, too fast. My head spun. I held on, a writing desk to my right against the wall, a tray with sealed correspondence, and on top of the envelope, a silver letter opener, long thin blade, sharp point. I reached out and took it. The handle was cold and had a good weight in the palm of my hand, enough weight to do damage if I hit the right place. The door opened. He walked in without hurry, without a sound. The same man from the hallway, the one in the black suit with no tie. Now, under the lamplight, I could see the rest. Early 30s, dark hair combed back, sharp jaw, eyes of a colorless color, the kind that changed depending on who's looking at them. He was carrying a glass of water, that was all. No bodyguard behind him, no visible weapon, none of that open-handed gesture men make when they want you to believe they won't hurt you. I pointed the letter opener at him. "If you lay a finger on me," I said, voice scraped but steady, "I'll put this in your neck." He stopped in the middle of the rug. He looked at the letter opener. He looked at me. He didn't disarm me. He didn't laugh. He didn't move closer. He just changed his course and walked to the armchair furthest from the sofa, across the low table, and sat down. The leather of the chair gave a small creak under his weight. He set the glass of water on the table between us. He pushed it a centimeter in my direction, withdrew his hand. "It's here," he said. "If you want it." His voice was low. A controlled Russian accent, the kind that's been speaking English so many years that it chooses to let the accent stay. I didn't lower the letter opener. "Who are you?" "Nikolai Draven." "What kind of name is that?" "The name of the man sitting here." He folded his hands over his knee. "You're in a suite of the same hotel you walked into. A floor above, same building, same cameras. Why am I here? Because you were about to hit your head on that hallway carpet, and I didn't want to explain the blood to reception. You heard the phone call." "I did. All of it?" "All of it." I gripped the silver handle harder. The cold metal was the only real thing in that room. "What do you want?" He tilted his head a little, as if considering the question with more respect than it deserved. "I want his name." "Why?" "Because it's the only thing you haven't given me yet, and I can't decide anything without it." "Decide what?" "Whether I go to bed to sleep, or whether I work tonight." I laughed. It was an ugly laugh, no joy in it, and it was the most honest laugh I'd given all year. He didn't follow. He just waited, with the patience of someone who could stay there until the sun came up without moving a muscle. "What do you get out of this?" I asked. "Maybe nothing. And what will you charge me later?" "You decide whether it's worth telling me." We were silent. I looked at the glass of water in the middle of the table. The condensation had drawn a small halo on the dark wood. He didn't gesture for me to drink. He didn't argue. He didn't say please. He just waited, like someone who had learned, somewhere before that hotel, that hurry is also a form of lying. I lowered the letter opener a centimeter, not letting go. "Low." "Falcon," I said. It was quick, but I saw it. His index finger lightly touched the glass he himself was holding, and for a fraction of a second, his hand closed, tightened, released. His face didn't change. His breath didn't change. Only the glass knew. I stored that inside me the way you store a phone number that might save your life later. "Dante Falcon," I added. "I dated him for a year. He bought my family's debt in secret. He pays for my father's treatment as a gift. He puts a new padlock on my parents' house when I break up with him. My parents are gone. I just got a message saying I come back to him, or I'll never see them again. And I'm not going back." "You're not going back," he repeated, with no inflection, like someone confirming an address. "No." "Good." That was the only word he said for about 30 seconds. Then he stood. The movement was slow, calculated, as if he had mentally counted every centimeter between his armchair and the sofa I was on, so that I could see each one of them remained untouched. "I'm going to leave this room," he said. "The door locks from the inside. You can lock it. You can sleep. You can not sleep. You can call your friend back. You can go downstairs and leave. If you leave, pay for your night normally at reception. No one is going to stop you. I'm not going to touch you. No one is going to touch you inside this hotel. Why should I believe that? He stopped at the door. He didn't turn fully, just enough for his profile to appear against the golden light. You shouldn't, he said, but you're going to have to decide something before dawn, and I'm what you've got. He left. I stayed sitting on the sofa, silver letter opener in my right hand, the untouched glass of water a hand's width away. I waited 10 minutes. I waited 20. I counted the hands of my wristwatch until I lost count. The door didn't move. I got up, locked it, sat back down, looked at the glass, looked at the letter opener. I thought of my mother wrapping the dough for pão de queijo in a kitchen towel, of my father sleeping on the couch with his mouth open, of Mira's voice asking me to breathe. I drank the water, not all of it. 2 sips. It was cold, with a faint mineral taste, and it went down my throat as if it were waking up, in slow motion, every part of my body that had forgotten how to function in the past 6 hours. It was the first thing that had entered my body since Dante's wine. Before I went out, I heard, in the hallway on the other side of the door, the low voice of Nikolai on the phone, speaking in Russian, with that clipped cadence of someone giving orders. I didn't understand a word. I understood the tone. It was a tone that didn't allow for delay, and which, for some reason I still couldn't fit inside me, seemed to already be on its way to Queens. I don't remember the moment I fell asleep. I remember lying on my side, pulling the soaked coat over my chest, thinking the silver letter opener was ridiculously small for the size of the night, and keeping my fingers closed around it anyway. I woke with the sun, pale light, almost gray, hitting the corner of the curtain. The room was the same one I had left. The glass, on the table, the letter opener in my hand, the door, locked from the inside. A knock, low, twice. "Miss Voss," a voice said from the other side. "Mr. Draven asked you to come down. Your mother called." I sat up so fast the whole suite spun. The suite on the floor above, I remembered. Not the private room I had walked into the night before. "What do you mean?" my mother called. "She's with your father in a house on Long Island. They're both fine. I was asked to tell you that men left here in the early hours and pulled them out of the hideout where Mr. Falcon had been keeping them. Their message was, 'Your daughter is no longer alone.'" I was on my feet without realizing I'd stood up. I opened the door with the other hand, still holding the letter opener. Outside, standing with his back to me, watching the hallway, was the tall, broad-shouldered man I had seen at the end of the corridor the night before. He didn't turn. He just tilted his head slightly, signaling down the hall, and said, "Through the private elevator. Car ready." I went down. The elevator was lined with smoked mirror, and the woman looking back at me from inside it was not exactly the same woman who had walked into the hotel the night before. The car was black, armored, the kind with weight to the door when it shuts. I crossed the city in silence, watching the East River wake up, the metallic water reflecting a sky that hadn't yet decided on its color. When I walked into the house, my mother was in an apron, her eyes red, and my father was in a borrowed robe, sitting in an armchair with a pattern I'd never seen before. They both stood up at the same time and I ran. I hugged my mother first, because she takes it the hardest. I smelled her cheap soap mixed with the perfume of a house that wasn't ours. Then my father, carefully, with the memory of his heart inside my embrace. "Honey, how?" my mother began. "I don't really know. Some men came, 3, maybe 4, my father said, his voice slow. They only said one sentence. They said you weren't alone anymore. They didn't ask for money. They didn't ask for anything. They brought us here." I looked over their shoulders. Nikolai was at the doorway of the kitchen, not having stepped in. Same clothes as the night before, same hand in his pocket, as if he had crossed the entire night without permission to sit down. I let my parents go gently and crossed the room to him. I stopped 1 step away. "How?" I asked. "How did you manage, in the middle of the night, to get 2 people out who were locked up by the henchmen of a man like Dante Falcon?" He looked at me. He held it. He didn't answer right away. "They're safe," he said finally. "That's what matters." I held his gaze back. "It's not everything that matters." "It's not," he agreed. "But it's enough for this morning." I tucked that sentence next to the other one, the one about the glass squeezed when I said Falcon. 2 small things. In a small pocket inside me I hadn't even known was open. Behind me, my father called my name softly, the way he calls when the medication starts to kick in. I turned around. I smiled at him with every bit of shell I had left. When I turned back to Nikolai, I swore to myself, silently, with the silver letter opener still in my left hand, that every centimeter of that rescue was going to be paid back, that a debt to an unknown man was worse than a debt to a known one, that I wasn't going to trade Dante for another collar just because the new one came lined in silk, and that, if his hand had tightened on the glass when I said Falcon, something much older than me was going on inside that room, something that hadn't started the night before, and that maybe wouldn't end with me. I wanted to know what, but first, I wanted to know for how much. Chapter 3. Who Buys Silence with Pianos? That same afternoon, I was taken to Tribeca with my parents in a second car. The apartment had high ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a silence that wasn't peace. It was a silence of someone built to handle secrecy. I woke up in the guest room on the first morning, not knowing what city I was in, and it took me 3 whole seconds to remember it was still New York, that my parents were alive in a house on Long Island, and that the man who had brought me there hadn't charged me a single thing yet. That was exactly what got me on my feet before coffee. The room smelled like new bedding, the kind that still holds the soap of the hotel where it has never been washed, and the rug had the soft thickness that muffles the steps of someone who doesn't yet trust the floor. I opened the closet without needing to. There were clothes in my exact size hanging on light wood hangers, tags still on, as if someone had memorized my measurements before I arrived. I closed the door slowly. It should have scared me, but I had already crossed the line where care becomes terrifying. I found Nikolai in the kitchen, leaning against the marble counter, in a gray shirt rolled at the forearms and a cup he wasn't drinking. The morning sun was coming in diagonally through a gap in the curtain and hitting exactly his left wrist, lighting up a vein that ran up to his elbow. I looked away before I caught myself looking. Beside him, an older man in a navy suit, with the eyes of someone who listened to lawsuits for a living. Yuri Sokolov, the attorney, was introduced in 3 words, Yuri, my counsel, and gave the smallest nod, as if I were a client, not a barefoot fugitive. Before leaving, he looked me up and down, then at Nikolai, and said a single sentence in Russian, with the serenity of a coroner over a file. I didn't understand the words. I understood it was a diagnosis. Good morning, Nikolai said. Coffee? I want to talk. Yuri glanced at Nikolai, tilted his head a millimeter, and left without saying goodbye, closing the kitchen door behind him with the precision of a man who had never closed a door any other way. I learned in that second that men in that circle understood dismissals from the movement of the eyes. I sat on the tall stool across from Nikolai. I folded my hands so he wouldn't notice they were shaking. The marble of the counter was cold under my elbows, and the smell of fresh coffee rose between us, as if it were the only civilized thing in that too large kitchen. How much does this cost? I asked, pointing at the ceiling with my chin. The apartment, the security, the lawyer, my father's medicine that arrived yesterday before it ran out. How much? You're not going to pay me. Yes, I am. I can play piano at your events. I can teach piano to the kids of friends of yours. I can do spreadsheets, organize files, anything that has a number at the end. He set the cup down on the counter, calmly, as if the porcelain needed care, and I didn't. The sound of the china on the marble was so low it seemed intentional, a way of forcing me to listen to what was coming. A debt to me isn't paid with obedience, Isabella. With what then? With nothing. His eyes met mine and stayed there, clear, not blinking, the gray color some winter mornings have. If you walk around with the feeling of paying, I failed. I swallowed the answer in my throat. It was the first time in my life that anyone had said something that large to me in a low voice without a hidden contract inside. It was exactly why I didn't believe him. Men who say large things in a low voice usually have the invoice tucked into their inside pocket. I'll stay, I said, my voice steady, for my parents. Not out of trust. He nodded once, and it was almost a form of respect. You look like you didn't sleep, he said, pushing a cup in my direction. Black coffee, or do you prefer it with milk? Black. I figured. I didn't ask how he had figured. I noted it mentally, alongside his grip on the glass the night before, and drank. The coffee was strong, slightly bitter, and went down burning my chest as if it were lighting a small light inside me that I'd sworn I'd put out 2 days before. The first 3 days passed, as if someone had placed a glass dome over my life. The security was so discreet, I almost forgot it existed. A man at the front desk, another in the hallway of the floor, Anton appearing and disappearing with the consistency of a shadow that knew exactly when to move. When I crossed paths with him in the hall, I got the same nod, exact, millimetric. One afternoon, I asked him if he slept. Occasionally, he answered, without slowing his pace. I stood in the corridor, Not knowing if he had made a joke, I decided, just to be safe, that he had. Mira called every day. She refused 4 times to take a cab to Tribeca before I asked her, in the lightest voice possible, to wait a few more days. She accepted in exchange for a vow that I was eating. I lied about breakfast, but not about dinner, because Nikolai would appear in the living room near mealtime, with no comment, and push a plate in my direction, as if it were the decision of the house, not his. They were small plates, well-plated, always without red meat. Mushroom risotto one night, white fish on another, and a pumpkin soup with a spoonful of cream in the center that looked drawn by a patient hand. I never saw him cook. I never saw whoever cooked either. Things just appeared, the way the piano would appear later, unsigned. On the 3rd day, I came back from the small market in the building with a bag of bread and stopped at the living room door. In the middle of the pale rug, by the window facing the water, was a black grand piano, a Steinway, tuned, the lid raised, as if someone knew exactly where the morning light fell best. There was no note. I sat on the bench slowly, took off my coat, and played a scale just to listen. The instrument answered as if it had been chosen for me, in another life, before I knew I even had a taste. The tone was warm, deep, with that bass resonance that makes the wood of the bench vibrate against the back of your thighs. I played 3 bars of a Chopin piece my mother used to hum in the kitchen, and closed the lid before I cried. Nikolai appeared in the doorway the exact second I pulled myself together. I hadn't heard him walking, and I wondered, for a fraction, how long he had been there. "Do you buy women with pianos?" I asked, turning my face toward the window. The words came out more acid than I meant. "I buy silence." He walked into the room without hurry, stopped 2 steps from the piano, and looked at the instrument, not at me. "You play too loud for that," I laughed. It was a short, low laugh, one I didn't have permission to give. When I realized I had laughed, I hated myself for it in the same sentence in which I heard my own voice. He kept not looking at me, as if he had calculated that this was exactly what I needed, someone who would receive the laugh without making it a trophy. "It wasn't a gift," he said, finally, running the tip of his index finger along the edge of the lid, without reaching the keys. "It was a return. You didn't ask to stop playing when you came in here. I just removed the thing that was standing between you and the piano." He left before I could find an answer. His scent stayed in the air for a few seconds. Something dry, woody, no sweetness, like the smell of an expensive coat that has spent the night on a cold balcony. That night, brushing my teeth, I noticed for the first time that there was a thin strip of light under the door of the room, and that the light was coming from a body standing still on the other side of the corridor. Nikolai didn't pace. He wasn't on the phone. He was simply there. I turned off the light and lay in the dark with my eyes open, sure that he was watching me because something in me was still useful for something. It was the safer explanation. The other explanation would have required me to close my eyes, and I wasn't ready. I woke up on the 4th morning with a short pulse and the immediate feeling that something wrong was happening in another room. The air in the bedroom was colder than it should be, and I realized, even before sitting up in bed, that the corridor door was already open. I found my mother in the hallway, barefoot, with the phone trembling in her hand. "It's your father." I don't remember the coat. I remember the apartment door opening before I even asked, the elevator going down already empty, the car at the front of the building with Nikolai at the wheel. Not Anton. Him. "Get in," Nikolai said, without turning his head. I got in. He drove through the empty streets with the calm of someone who had made that route 100 times, though I would have sworn he hadn't. My mother sat in the back, her hand on my father's knee, while he breathed too deeply. The yellow streetlight slid across the window in a steady rhythm, hitting his profile and lighting, for an instant, the tense jaw and the tendon in his neck. Every time a red light held us, Nikolai counted 3 seconds with his chin and went on. When we arrived at the hospital, Anton was standing at the emergency entrance, with 2 nurses and a stretcher, as if someone had warned them we were coming. Someone had warned them. They wheeled my father down the white corridor. I ran beside the stretcher to the door that separated family from patients, and there I stopped, my hand still on the cold steel, not knowing where to send the urge to scream. The hospital smell, antiseptic, warmed plastic, reheated coffee in some distant filter, went in through my nose and clung there. Nikolai didn't come in with me. I hadn't noticed until that moment, but he had stopped at the start of the corridor, leaning against the wall, far enough not to intrude, close enough that I could see him out of the corner of my eye every time I looked over my shoulder. He stayed there. No magazine, no phone, no distraction, just standing, hands at his sides, as if he were guarding a perimeter that had no physical shape. My mother sat down on the plastic chair next to the door, and fell asleep from exhaustion before dawn. I stayed on my feet until 4 in the morning. I walked to the water fountain, came back. I walked to the end of the corridor, came back. Every time I came back, he was still in the same place. The fluorescent lights buzzed lowly above our heads, and the vinyl floor echoed every nurse's step, as if the corridor itself were a resonant chamber for my anxiety. Around 5:30, the doctor came out with the good news I wasn't allowed to receive in silence. I felt my legs go weak. I leaned against the wall, slid down to sit on the floor, and cried for the first time since the dinner at the penthouse. It was an ugly cry, no decorum, the kind you use when no one is looking. When I lifted my head, Nikolai was crouched in front of me, with a paper cup in his hand. The knee of his pants touched the floor without him caring about the expensive fabric, and I remember thinking, absurdly, that no one kneels on a hospital floor for free. "Coffee," he said. "You didn't ask, I know." I took the cup. His hands brushed mine for half a second, warm, rougher than they looked from a distance, and he was the first to pull back. "Why are you still here?" I asked. My voice scratched. "Don't you have a Mafia to run?" He almost smiled. Almost. It was the closest to a smile I'd seen on him, and it lasted less than a breath. "I do." "So?" He looked at the fluorescent ceiling, then at me. He spoke low, as if the sentence could only fit in the space between us. "Because no one has asked you what you wanted in a long time." I closed my eyes. I didn't answer. I had no answer that fit. I drank the too bitter coffee and forced myself to call it gratitude, because the other word would have knocked me over right there, on the white floor of the corridor, in front of a man who would bleed the whole city dry before he apologized. We went back to Tribeca in the morning, with my father stabilized and admitted for another night of observation. My mother stayed in his room. Nikolai arranged a hotel room across from the hospital so she wouldn't have to cross the city. In the car back, no one spoke. The city was waking up outside, steam coming from the manholes and bakeries turning on their lights, and I watched it all through the window, as if I were the first person to see New York in the morning. When the elevator stopped on the floor, Anton was waiting with a tray of toast and fruit, as if his life were exactly that, anticipating what I hadn't been able to ask for. "You should sleep," Nikolai said, at the door of my room. "You first." He tilted his head slightly, conceding the point. "Mira called. She'll have dinner here tomorrow." "Did she invite herself, or was it you?" "She invited herself. I just sent the driver." He hesitated half a second. "Your father was discharged this afternoon. Your mother asked to stay a few more days in Long Island with him before they come here. I thought it was better not to interrupt. I closed the door between us." I leaned my forehead against the wood, feeling the cool grain against my skin. I stayed there long enough to hear his steps walk away down the hall, and short enough to notice that he was walking slowly on purpose, so I'd have time to change my mind if I wanted to. I didn't, but I logged it. I fell into bed dressed and slept for the first time without dreaming of Dante's penthouse. I dreamed of an open Steinway, with the morning light hitting only one side, and a bitter coffee no one had charged me for. When I woke up, it was already the afternoon of Monday of the following week. Mira was arriving on Tuesday. For the first time since the hotel, I wasn't afraid of being seen, and that I knew was the most dangerous part. Chapter 4. The Storm. She Almost Kissed Mira arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, in a short black dress, heels she swore she knew how to walk in, and a bottle of wine she clearly hadn't picked out herself. "Gift from the driver," she explained, handing the bottle over at the door with the gesture of someone unloading evidence. "He said you like it." I looked at Anton, 3 steps behind her, in the discreet posture of a man who knew how to occupy a frame without drawing attention. He held my gaze with the serenity of someone who had never lied in his life and didn't intend to start. "You talk too much," Mira said over her shoulder, without turning, as if the comment were part of a conversation that had been going on for weeks in her head. "Occasionally," Anton answered. Mira stopped in the middle of the entry hall, slowly turned her face, and I could swear I saw a half-smile cross her mouth before she gave up on the smile and kept walking into the living room. Anton closed the door behind her with his usual lightness, as if the previous scene hadn't happened, as if that small match struck between the two of them could be put out by his sheer will to fake discipline. Nikolai was waiting in the dining room, with his right sleeve adjusted a millimeter higher than the left, as if that mattered to him. The low chandelier light pulled long shadows from the silverware over the raw linen tablecloth, and the air carried the warm scent of bread coming out of the oven mixed with a trace of rosemary from the kitchen. He kissed Mira's cheek with the bare minimum courtesy of a man who didn't waste charm on strangers, but who also didn't ration it on people who mattered to me. Mira studied him with the discretion of a wolf pretending not to be hunting. Dinner was simple: fish, grilled vegetables, dark bread. When the plates came, Nikolai poured wine into my glass before I asked, filled it to the line I usually drank from, and stopped at the exact millimeter. Mira said nothing, but I saw her eye register the gesture as if she were noting it in an invisible notebook, with a pen only she could see. "No red meat," she commented, after tasting the fish, chewing slowly. "You remembered. She doesn't eat it," Nikolai replied, without looking at me, with the calm of someone stating a fact, and not a courtesy. It would make sense to serve it. Mira chewed slowly, and took too long to swallow. The conversation moved over piano students, over the Upper East Side student who had sent an apology bouquet for the sudden disappearance, over Mira's sister's birthday coming up, and the dress she still hadn't ordered. At some point, I got distracted by a light flickering across the street, maybe a faulty sign, maybe the reflection of a passing car, and the shoulder of my blouse slipped a centimeter. Nikolai reached out, and, with the tip of his finger, adjusted the fabric over my collarbone in the briefest and most intimate gesture I had ever received without anyone asking permission. He didn't look. He didn't comment. He went on cutting his own fish as if his hand had acted on its own, and as if the rest of his body had no idea what that finger had done to me. Mira swallowed her wine slowly. I felt the heat climb up my neck and forced myself not to lift my hand to my shoulder. It was ridiculous. It had been a 4-second touch, and it had still lasted hours inside my skin. Mira had warned me, still at the door, that she would sleep in the guest room next to mine. Brooklyn was too far to go back in heels, and she knew my bed better than her own. Later, in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed while she pulled off her heels and threw each shoe into a different corner of the pale rug, with the cruel satisfaction of someone avenging entire feet after a night of imprisonment. "Bella," she said, with no preamble, rubbing her heel with the palm of her hand. "That man looks at you like you're the only light in the room." I laughed, bitter. Dante used to look at me like that too. No, she stopped removing her earrings, and the left earring dangled from a single silver wire. "Dante used to look at you like you were the only light in his room. That one looks at you like the room wouldn't have any light left if you walked out. There's a difference." I didn't answer. I got up, went to the window, leaned my forehead against the cold glass. Down below, Tribeca shimmered in puddles of rain that hadn't fallen yet, and the traffic drew red and white lines that crossed like crooked pulses of a city that never fully slept. "You're falling in love," Mira said quietly. "I'm tired. Both things can be true at the same time." When she turned off the light and curled up under the comforter, her breathing already heavy before the second sentence, I lay in the dark, thinking about the centimeter of fabric he had adjusted on my shoulder. It was ridiculous. It was a 4-second gesture, and yet it was the first thing in months that had made me feel that there was a body under that blouse, and that the body was alive, and that the body had for a long time been waiting for someone to touch it, as if it weren't a possession, but a person. The storm arrived just after 2 in the morning. I heard the first thunder, still distant, rolling over the Hudson like a big stone falling down a long corridor, and I gave up pretending to sleep. The bedroom window trembled slightly with each gust, and the rain began hitting the glass in isolated points, like impatient fingers asking for attention. I left the room barefoot, in a thin nightgown, and walked through the dark hallway to the only door that always had a sliver of yellow light slipping out from underneath, the library. I pushed the door open slowly. The smell of old paper, treated leather, and a low note of whiskey reached me before the image did. Nikolai was sitting in the leather armchair, with a book open on his knee and the first buttons of his shirt undone, the lamplight drawing a warm curve along his jaw. I hadn't seen it before. Under his right collarbone, sloping down toward his chest, there was an old scar, thick, white, at the edges. It wasn't recent. It wasn't an accident. It was memory. He looked up when I walked in. He didn't close the shirt. "You can't sleep. I came here for a reason." I crossed my arms against the cold, or against what wasn't cold at all. "And it isn't the book," I figured. Another roll of thunder, closer now. The window shuddered slightly behind him, and the flame of a forgotten candle on the desk shuddered too, as if it had heard. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "The truth. No going around it. Or I'll grab my coat right now and walk out of this apartment even with nowhere to go." He closed the book carefully, as if the word he was about to say deserved the entire silence of the space. He marked the page with a dark ribbon. In no hurry, with no theater. He stood. He came over to where I was, stopped close enough that I could feel the heat coming off his skin through the open fabric of his shirt, close enough that I could recognize his scent of cold tobacco and something green, like freshly cut cedar, because you're the first thing in years that I can't classify as either a threat or a use. That's a line. It isn't. His eyes dropped from my eyes to my mouth and came back in half a second, on a path I felt as if it had been made with the hand and not with the gaze. I don't know what to do with this, Isabella. I have never not known what to do with anything. I tilted my face a little. It was a centimeter, maybe 2. His breath adjusted to mine, and I realized, with a clarity that hurt, that he was holding himself back on purpose so as not to be the one to close the distance. He didn't tilt his. He waited. He waited in a way that hurt more than if he had moved. His mouth was a breath away from mine when I closed my eyes and took a step back, with the courage of a coward who knows she isn't ready yet. He didn't hold me. He didn't reach out. He didn't say anything. He just tilted his head once, slowly, as if recognizing the boundary with the same gravity with which he would accept an order. That was what undid me. Not the almost kiss, the way he let me go. "Good night," he said, and it was the lowest voice he had used with me up to that point, almost a murmur held up by respect. "Good night," I answered. I walked out of the library with my legs shaking, closed my bedroom door, and lay in the dark with my hand over my mouth, not understanding whether I wanted to scream or laugh, because a man who knew the name of my fear had just offered me the way out instead of the touch. And that, in my life, was new. Outside, the storm finally broke in full, and I fell asleep listening to the rain like someone listening to a confession. I woke up late, with my head heavy from the sleep of someone who had cried without noticing. I put on a robe, walked barefoot to the kitchen expecting to find him leaning against the counter with his usual cup, and stopped at the door. The counter was clean, the coffee maker cold, his cup turned upside down on the drying rack, as if it had been washed in a hurry. Anton appeared in the doorway before I asked. "Out," he said, with that polite patience of his. He had vanished that morning without warning. Anton stayed at his post, calm, not answering where Nikolai had gone, just repeating the same syllable every time I asked, never changing his tone. Mira went home by Uber after breakfast, her shoes in her hand again and a quick wink in my direction before she shut the door. I taught an online lesson to a new student, an 11-year-old girl who still confused a half note with a whole note, ate lunch with no appetite from a plate that went cold in front of me, sat at the piano and couldn't play 3 bars without losing the line. My fingers obeyed me up to the middle of the second bar and locked up, as if they were also waiting for someone to cross the corridor. 2 days later, around 4 in the afternoon, I heard the elevator stop on the floor. Nikolai walked into the living room with a brown folder under his arm, his hair damp from the drizzle, and his right sleeve wet at the wrist. He brought the smell of the outdoors in with him, wet asphalt, cold air, a trace of black coffee. He set the folder on the piano without opening it. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, waiting for me to look back. I opened the folder. The first page was the deed to my parents' house in Queens, with my father's name in print, no annotations, no mortgage, no liens. The second page was a no-debt certificate, with the stamp of a company I'd never heard of, and Yuri Sokolov's signature in the corner, in a firm and economic stroke. The third page was an administratively voided contract, with the name Vasari Holdings crossed out in red pen, in a thick line that looked like contained fury. I couldn't breathe right. "How?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "It doesn't matter how. It matters. Did you buy it back? Pay someone? Threaten someone? It doesn't matter, Isabella." He touched the corner of the folder with one finger and pushed it a millimeter in my direction, with a delicacy out of step with the rest of him. "What matters is that it's yours again, not mine. I don't want those papers in any man's name." I looked at the page, looked at him, looked at the page again. It was the house where my mother had hung the first curtain she ever sewed, one of yellow cotton that had faded 2 shades lighter with summer suns. It was the room where my father had taught me to read sheet music on the floor, the 2 of us lying on our stomachs on the worn rug. It was the address that, for an entire year, had been the collar nobody had shown me. And now, it was in my name, not in his, in mine. I lifted my face and realized, with a clarity that split me in 2, that he was giving me power back, piece by piece, without demanding display, without expecting filmed gratitude, like someone who understands that the theft of a person isn't undone with a single grand gesture, but with many small ones. stitched together in silence. "Why like this?" I asked. "Why return it in pieces? Why not all at once?" He thought before answering. I had already learned that, when he thought first, it was because the answer was important, and that he preferred to delay a sentence rather than hand over the wrong one, because all at once would be my gift. In pieces, it starts to feel like yours again each time you open a page. I pressed the folder to my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just lowered my head, rested my forehead against the thick cardboard cover, feeling the rough texture against my skin, and breathed in the warm smell of fresh ink and old files. He stood 2 steps away, not coming closer, not saying anything else, until I lifted my face and said thank you in a voice that barely was one. "No," he answered. "You don't have to thank me for what was always yours." He left the room slowly, with the same calculated cadence as the night before, and I was left alone in front of the Steinway, with a cardboard folder in my hands, and the exact feeling that some wall inside my chest had just come down without making a sound. I justified it as respect. I justified it as relief. I justified it as gratitude, because the other word was forbidden, because the other word would have meant choosing a man over myself again, and I had sworn, in the cab between Dante's penthouse and Queen's, never again. I took a long bath, the water almost too hot, hoping the steam would untie the knot in my chest. I put on light pajamas. I went back to the kitchen around 11 for water, with the apartment silent, only the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant tick of some clock down the hall. And that was when I saw Anton standing near the service elevator, with the radio at his ear and an expression a tenth tenser than usual. The light from the hallway fell on him diagonally and hardened his jaw. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Everything." "Anton." He looked at me. He hesitated. It was the first hesitation I had ever seen on that man. "Someone tested the service elevator code 10 minutes ago," he said, low, almost not moving his lips. "Got it wrong 3 times and gave up. A code that only passes through 6 hands in this house, miss. 6. And one of them changed the flowers in the living room this morning without anyone asking." "What do you mean, someone?" "Probably a mistake, miss." He had already gone back to his neutral expression, like someone shutting a steel door from the outside. "Go to sleep." I stood in the kitchen with the glass in my hand for another minute, unable to swallow, feeling the cold glass against my palm. The service code was 6 digits. Getting it wrong 3 times wasn't a mistake. Getting it wrong 3 times was someone testing combinations they had gotten somewhere else. Someone who had come too close to a number that only passed through a counted number of hands. I turned off the kitchen light without drinking the water. I went back to the bedroom along a hallway that suddenly seemed longer. I pulled the door to. I sat on the bed with the brown folder in my lap, my fingers gripping the flap as if it could anchor me to something. Outside, on the other side of the corridor, the strip of light under the library door was still on. This time, I knew he wasn't reading. Chapter 5. You Bled for Me. The night in Tribeca had a strange silence. It wasn't the silence of the other floors of the building, which I had already learned to recognize by the low hum of the central air conditioning and the distant sound of the elevators. It was a fuller silence, as if someone had turned off something that had been on the whole time. I was in the hallway that separated the living room from my bedroom, barefoot, with a glass of water in my hand, coming back from the kitchen not really knowing why I had gotten up. Maybe it was because of Anton's warning, the night before, about the service elevator code being tested 3 times. Maybe it was the folder Nikolai had put in my hands that afternoon, with the deed to my parents' house and the canceled debt, and the sentence "now it's yours again," not mine, repeating inside my head like a poorly tuned song. Maybe it was just the instinct every woman carries, and that I learned to respect too late. The wood floor was cold under the soles of my feet, and I noticed, without meaning to, the way the low hallway light drew long shadows on the entrance bookshelves. The glass slipped a centimeter in my hand when I heard the first click on the other side of the elevator. It wasn't loud. It was the kind of sound you only recognize afterward, when the second one comes, drier, faster, and the service elevator door opens with a hiss of steel. Behind me, Nikolai's voice arrived before his body did. He appeared in the hallway with his white shirt open at the first buttons, his hair still damp from the shower he must have finished 2 minutes earlier, and the gun already steady in his right hand. I hadn't even heard him walk. He reached me in 3 steps, grabbed my arm with a strength that didn't hurt, and pulled me behind his own body as if I weighed the same as the glass in my hand. "Nikolai," I started, and the word came out higher than I wanted. "Don't speak." The first man rounded the corner of the corridor with a pistol in his hand, and the wrong eyes. They were the eyes of someone who had already decided how that night was going to end, before even coming upstairs. Nikolai fired a single shot. The sound was louder than anything I had ever heard in my life, and it slammed against the walls of the room as if the whole building had swallowed the impact. The man fell. "They know the floor," Nikolai murmured, without looking at me. "They know the code. Someone leaked it." I didn't have time to process the sentence. The second intruder appeared from the opposite side, coming from the fire stairs, and in that instant, I understood what Anton had been trying to tell me the night before in 3 words. They had a floor plan. They had a schedule. They had an inside hand. The second man fired first. I saw Nikolai's white shirt change color before I understood what had happened. A red stain bloomed on his shoulder, on the left side, high enough not to be fatal, and low enough to hurt for weeks. He didn't make a sound. He just shifted his weight from one foot to the other, raised the gun with his right hand, and returned the shot. The second man fell 3 meters from me. His gun hit the dark wood floor with an echo that took a while to die out. I looked at Nikolai. Nikolai looked at his shoulder. He brought his eyes back to the end of the hallway, calculating whether there was a third, and in that half-second of calculation, the thing happened that I had never imagined would happen. I bent down and picked up the gun from the floor. It wasn't a thought. It was hand. The grip was heavy, heavier than it looked in a movie, and my fingers found the trigger with the stubborn memory of that shooting range where my father, paranoid after the break-in on the street below, had forced me to go 3 Saturdays in a row when I was 16. At the end of the corridor, near the stairwell door, a third figure moved in the shadow. I didn't aim at him. I aimed high, at the doorframe, and squeezed before I thought twice. The bang from my hand shook my whole shoulder. The barrel jumped higher than I wanted, and the shot went into the wall above the frame instead of the frame. It didn't matter. The figure backed away, disappeared through the door, and the silence came back. A different silence now, with the smell of gunpowder and iron, and the fine plaster dust falling slowly like dirty snow. Nikolai turned his head slowly and looked at me. "You shot," he said. It wasn't a question. "At the air," I answered, my voice trembling only on the last syllable. "I'm not the kind of woman who kills a man in her first week." He almost laughed. Almost. His mouth tugged a millimeter to the side, and he was already pushing me down the hallway back to the library when Anton came up the main stairs with 3 men behind him, and an expression I had never seen before. An expression that wasn't ironic and wasn't controlled. It was furious. Anton stopped 2 steps away, waited for Nikolai's look, and only then gave a short nod. "Shoulder," Nikolai answered, in 1 word, as if that were enough for a whole report. "Building locked down. Service elevator. Search from the inside." Anton looked at me for half a second. He lowered his eyes to the gun in my hand, then climbed back up to my face, and what he said next was the closest thing to a compliment I'd ever heard come out of that mouth. "Good shot, miss." I aimed at the door frame. "I know." He went down the corridor with his men, and I heard the 3 of them walk off in different directions, each one covering a part of the floor with the trained silence of someone who had done it many times. I didn't realize I was still holding the gun, until Nikolai slowly reached out and took the grip from my fingers, without saying anything, the way you take a cup from the hand of someone who has fallen asleep. Then he pushed me by the back, a large hand at the base of my neck, and led me to the library down the longer hallway, the one that went over the rug, and not over the wood floor stained with blood. The library had the yellow light on, just the way he had left it hours before. The book he had been reading was still open on the arm of the armchair, with the spine facing up and a glass of whiskey half full on the side table. It smelled like leather, old paper, and now also like the warm metal we had brought from the hallway. Nikolai sat on the leather sofa, his white shirt sticking to his shoulder in a shape that kept widening. I went to the service bathroom, grabbed the first aid kit I had already seen on my second day in that house, came back, and knelt on the floor between his legs, without asking permission. "Take off the shirt." He looked at me. It was a slow look, the kind he kept for things he was still deciding whether he could have. "You give orders now. Today. Yes. Take it off." He took it off, with his right hand, because his left arm was starting to lock up. The white fabric fell on the sofa next to him, and it was the first time I had seen his whole chest in the lit room. The old scar was there, on the right side, long and pale, the kind made by something that had gone in and come out without asking permission. The new wound was on his left shoulder, with a dark edge and a live center, and it was cleaner than I had feared. "Graze," I said, more to myself than to him. "Graze," he confirmed. My hands opened the kit on the floor. Gauze, saline, antiseptic, tweezers, tape. I lined everything up in the right order, and when I started cleaning the wound I noticed that my hands weren't trembling anymore. They had trembled when I fired. They weren't trembling now. I couldn't decide whether that was strength or just my body giving in at the right moment and giving me back to myself in this one. "You were fast," I said, gently passing the cotton. "I was slow," he answered. "If I'd been fast, you wouldn't have had to pick up a gun off the floor." I aimed at the door frame. "You aimed where you needed to." He watched every movement I made without moving. I felt the heat of his skin climb up the tips of my fingers every time I touched him, and I tried not to think about that while I closed the dressing. I also tried not to think about the way his chest rose and fell slower than mine, as if his body had been trained to store pain where no one could see. The bandage took longer than it had to, because I needed 2 passes around his whole shoulder, and his arms were too broad for the roll. When I finished, I sealed the tape with a flick of my thumb and looked up. He had been looking at me for a while. "You shouldn't trust me like this," Nikolai said. The sentence arrived low. His right hand had risen to my wrist while I was sealing the tape, and he hadn't let go. His fingers were warm and covered half of my forearm. I took a deep breath. I held his gaze. "I don't trust you, I know, but today you bled for me." My voice didn't tremble. "That counts for something." He closed his eyes for a second. It was the first time in all those weeks I had seen him close his eyes in front of me, without having calculated beforehand that he had permission to. When he opened them, he pulled my wrist slowly, a request in the pressure and no demand in the movement, and I let my body follow until I was on my knees between his legs, with my face at the height of his face. "Isabella, don't talk now," I asked, and he didn't talk. The kiss came to my forehead first. It stayed there, with his breath falling down my skin as if he were counting to 10 before anything. Then it moved to my temple, to my cheek, and finally to my mouth, and when it reached my mouth it was a slow kiss, in no hurry, tasting of iron and of something older. I could smell the blood on the shirt fallen at our side. I could feel his pulse beating in the place where his hand was holding my chin. It was a kiss that asked permission with every centimeter, and with every centimeter I gave it. When he pulled back, it was only enough to rest his forehead against mine. "Turn off the light," I said, not recognizing my own voice. He reached for the lamp. I caught that hand before it got there, and I was the one who hit the switch, his fingers inside mine. The library fell into a blue darkness, with the city light coming through the tall window, and the last thing I saw before closing my eyes was his profile sitting on the sofa, his shoulder bandaged, his breathing slower than mine. He murmured something in Russian against my forehead, 2 syllables that sounded like mine. I didn't understand the words in full. I didn't need to. The tone was surrender, not possession, and it was the tone that rocked me while the night went on without either of us leaving that room. I woke up to the smell of coffee. It took me a few seconds to figure out where I was. The blanket over me had the expensive heaviness, the kind that muffles sound and light at the same time. On top of the blanket, folded patiently, was a clean white shirt. His, not the bloody one. A new shirt, which he must have grabbed at some point in the night, after the house doctor came, properly closed the dressing, and left a painkiller on the tray next to the armchair. The untouched glass told me he hadn't taken it. I turned over slowly. Nikolai was sitting on the floor, leaning against the armchair next to the sofa where I had slept, still without a shirt, with the white bandage contrasting against the skin of his shoulder. He had a cup in his hands, and was looking through the tall window at the very pale blue of the dawn over the rooftops of Tribeca. He didn't see me wake up, or he saw, and pretended not to give me the chance to choose how to wake up. "Nico." He turned his head. He held the cup out to me without saying anything. I sat up on the sofa, pulled the blanket to my lap, and took the first sip. The coffee was strong the way he drank it, and sweet the way I drank it. He had memorized both and put both in the same cup. I rested the cup on my knee and leaned my head against his good shoulder, the right one, which was within reach, because he had sat turned toward me. His skin was warm and smelled of neutral soap, and something that was only his, that I had already begun to recognize in the dark. For the first time in months, I breathed deeply, and my chest didn't hurt. My parents were safe in Long Island. The house in Queens was in my name again. The debt that had almost killed my father didn't exist on any paper anywhere in the world. Dante had vanished into the night, and the man who had vanished for me was sitting on the floor of his library with a coffee he had prepared the way I liked, without asking. "Did you sleep?" I asked. "A little." I laughed quietly into his shoulder. "How's the shoulder?" "Alive. I'll change the dressing in a little while." "You will." His phone vibrated on the floor next to the armchair. He looked at the screen, and for a second I saw him think. Just a second. Then he answered, turning his body a little to the side, and his voice came out in Russian, low, 3 short sentences, and he hung up fast. Too fast. I lifted my eyes from the cup. He noticed my look. He didn't hide the phone. He set it on the floor again, with the screen face down, and turned his face back to me without changing his expression. "Port," he said. "Yuri, everything okay?" "It will be." I held the warm cup for a moment. Inside, without knowing why, a small question knocked on a wall of my chest and didn't leave as fast as I wanted. Why was he in exactly that corridor on that night, in the exact hotel where I was hiding? I didn't answer the question. I didn't push it out either. I left it where it had fallen, the way you leave a sealed letter on the table to open later. My parents were safe. The house was returned. The debt was canceled. Dante had vanished. Almost everything fit in that morning. Almost. I rested my face against his shoulder again and closed my eyes. Nico. Today I don't want to leave here. His hand moved up through my hair, slowly, stopped at the back of my neck, stayed there with the right weight. Today you don't leave. Outside, the blue of dawn began to turn orange from below, in one of those New York skies no one ever sees because they're asleep. I closed my eyes on his good shoulder, with his hand on the back of my neck, and let the morning pass over the two of us without making a sound. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for the next blow. I was just breathing, like the fool I am. Lena here. That wraps up book 1, and I've already finished book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee. 3 weeks were enough for me to surrender completely. 3 weeks of dangerous peace, of waking up with his body still warm next to mine, of feeling his big hand slide slowly over my hip as the sun came in through the Tribeca window, of hearing him murmur my name against my skin as if I were the only sacred thing in his violent life, of believing, with my whole heart, that the most dangerous man in New York had chosen to protect me, love me, save me. My parents were safe. Dante had disappeared, and I fell hopelessly in love with the monster who swore he would never let me fall again, until I woke up tied to an ice-cold chair, with the metallic taste of chloroform still burning in my throat. Dante was standing in front of me, calm, almost tender, not yelling, not hitting. He just laid the evidence on the table the way you slowly drive in a knife. Reports from 2 months before the hotel hallway. My name, my picture, my entire life. Effective target: Isabella Voss. Nikolai already knew who I was. Before the first look, before the first touch, before I held a knife to his throat. I was never saved. I was chosen. And then my ex gave me the cruelest choice anyone can offer the woman they love. Come back to me, hand over his folder, and survive. Or run back into the arms of the man you love, and find out whether every kiss, every promise, every night he took you, slowly was real, or the most calculated part of your destruction. Because it hurts more than any kidnapping to discover that the man for whom you opened your heart, your body, and your entire life may have planned every second of your fall, from the very beginning. And now, while my heart bleeds between 2 truths, only one question remains, and it's destroying me from inside. Did Nikolai Draven love me, or did he just manipulate me more skillfully than Dante ever could? Like I said, that was just a taste of book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Congratulations! Your purchase has been confirmed, and you now have full access to books 1 and 2 of all our stories, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Everything is available on the My Stories platform, from Mafia romance and billionaire romance to our spicier tales. This content is ready for you now, with new episodes added daily. Access is simple. Just log in using the same email address you used for your purchase. A confirmation has also been sent to that same email. The My Stories platform is very simple and intuitive. Each image represents a story. If it has a book 2, just click and press play. Everything is already unlocked for you. You can also rate each story, leave a like, and write a comment. Your feedback will be visible to all our other subscribers. This is our romance universe, so please feel free to interact. From this moment on, this is officially your home for romance stories. Just head over to mystoriesromance.com and press play. Welcome to the family.